The sound of sobbing drifted across the dusty plains like a lonely tumbleweed, catching Caleb Tucker's attention as he rode past what should have been an empty homestead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dilapidated wooden structure, its windows broken and porch sagging under the weight of abandonment and neglect. Caleb pulled back on the reins of his chestnut mare, listening intently. There it was again, unmistakable human anguish floating through the still Texas air. Caleb was not the type of man to meddle in others' affairs. At 32, he had spent most of his adult life drifting across the frontier, working cattle drives between Texas and Kansas, keeping to himself and avoiding entanglements. But something about that forlorn crying tugged at him, and before he could reconsider, he was dismounting and tethering his horse to a weathered hitching post. "Hello," he called out, his voice carrying across the overgrown yard. The sobbing abruptly stopped. "I don't mean no harm. Just checking if someone needs help." When no response came, Caleb cautiously approached the house, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. The wooden boards of the porch creaked beneath his weight as he reached the front door, which hung partially open on rusted hinges. "I'm coming in," he announced, pushing the door wider. The interior was bathed in dusty half-light filtered through grimy windows. As his eyes adjusted, he saw her, a young woman sitting on the floor in what must have once been the main room, her back against a wall, knees drawn up to her chest. She looked up at him with tear-stained cheeks, her honey-brown hair falling in tangled waves around her face. Despite the dirt smudged across her features, Caleb could see she was beautiful, though fear and grief had hollowed her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Name's Caleb Tucker. I was passing by and heard." He gestured vaguely, not wanting to mention her tears. "Are you hurt, miss?" The woman hastily wiped her face with the sleeve of her once fine dress, now torn and dirty. "I'm Lillian James." She swallowed hard. "And no, I'm not hurt. Not physically, anyway." It was 1878, and Gonzales, Texas was a town struggling to find its footing in the changing landscape of the post-war West. Once a proud symbol of Texan independence, it now existed as many frontier towns did, balancing between its storied past and uncertain future. Caleb removed his hat and took a tentative step forward. "This place has been abandoned for months. Not safe for a lady to be out here alone." Lillian's chin lifted slightly. "This was my family's home. I have every right to be here." "The James place," Caleb's brow furrowed. He'd heard talk in town about the James family's misfortune, how fever had taken the parents last winter, and the daughter had been sent east to relatives. "Thought you were in Boston." "I was, until a week ago." Her eyes drifted to the empty fireplace. "I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed to come home, but—" Her voice broke. "There's nothing left." Caleb shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the intimacy of witnessing someone else's grief. "Where are your things? You can't have traveled without baggage." "At the hotel in town. I hired a wagon to bring me out here this morning. The driver is returning for me at sundown." She looked toward the window, where the afternoon light was already beginning to wane. "Which should be soon." Caleb nodded, relieved that she wasn't completely stranded. Still, something kept him rooted to the spot when he should have tipped his hat and left her to her memories. "When's the last time you ate, Miss James?" The question seemed to surprise her. I don't recall." Caleb sighed and crossed to the doorway. "Wait here." He returned moments later with a small bundle from his saddlebag. Unwrapping the cloth revealed jerky and a slightly crushed biscuit. "It ain't much, but it's what I got." Lillian hesitated before accepting his offering. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Just Caleb is fine." He lowered himself to sit on the floor across from her, keeping a respectful distance. As Lillian ate, Caleb studied the abandoned house. The furniture was gone, likely sold to cover debts or stolen after the place was vacated. Only dust and memories remained. "What happened here?" he asked softly. "If you don't mind my asking." Lillian finished the biscuit before answering. "My father was a dreamer, came to Texas after the war with grand plans of building a cattle empire." A sad smile touched her lips. "But dreams don't account for drought or cattle fever. The herd died, the debts mounted, and then—" She took a deep breath. "Influenza took both my parents within days of each other." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, meaning it. "My uncle in Boston sent for me. He's my mother's brother and felt obligated, I suppose. But I was never more than a burden to his household." Her eyes met Caleb's. "I saved every penny I could earn as a seamstress. Once I had enough for passage back to Texas, I left, I thought." She glanced around the empty room. "I thought I could start over here. Foolish of me." "Not foolish," Caleb countered. "Brave." The word hung between them as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the room in amber hues. "The wagon should be coming," Lillian said, rising to her feet. "I should wait outside." Caleb stood as well, settling his hat back on his head. "What will you do now? Find work in town, I suppose. The hotel can't be my home forever." She attempted a brave smile that didn't reach her eyes. As they stepped onto the porch, the distant sound of wagon wheels caught their attention. But instead of coming toward the homestead, the sound was moving away. "That can't be right," Lillian said, moving to the edge of the porch. "He promised to return." Caleb frowned, scanning the horizon. The wagon was indeed traveling away from them, kicking up dust as it headed back toward Gonzales. "He's leaving me," Lillian whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "Maybe he forgot," Caleb offered, though they both knew it was unlikely. "Or maybe he never intended to return." Lillian's shoulders slumped. The full payment was due upon his return. He simply decided it wasn't worth the trouble. The approaching twilight suddenly seemed more threatening. The abandoned homestead was a good 5 miles from town, too far to walk before dark, especially for a woman alone. "I can take you back to Gonzales," Caleb said after a moment's consideration. "My horse can carry us both." Lillian looked at him warily. "You're very kind, Mr. Tucker, but I hardly know you." "That's true enough," he acknowledged. "But your choices are limited, Miss James. Night's coming, and this place offers little protection. No doors that lock, no light, no heat." The practical truth of his words sank in, and Lillian nodded reluctantly. "Very well, I accept your offer." They walked to where Caleb's mare waited patiently. "This is Penny," he said, patting the horse's neck. "She's steady and strong. She'll get us to town without trouble." Caleb helped Lillian mount, then swung up behind her. The proximity was unavoidable and awkward for them both. "I apologize for the impropriety," he said stiffly. "Circumstances dictate necessity, Mr. Tucker," Lillian replied with equal formality, though he could sense her discomfort. As they rode toward Gonzales, the vast Texas sky deepened from gold to purple. Lillian sat rigidly at first, careful not to lean back against Caleb's chest. But as the journey continued and the horse's steady gait lulled them into a rhythm, she gradually relaxed. "Have you been in Gonzales long?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Just passing through," Caleb replied. "Was headed to join a cattle drive to Dodge City, but I'm a few days early. Thought I'd earn some extra money doing odd jobs around town before heading out." "When do you leave?" "Monday next. 6 days from now." Lillian nodded, processing this information. "And before that, where is home for you, Mr. Tucker?" Caleb was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. "Nowhere particular," he finally said. "Been moving around since the war ended. Texas mostly. Oklahoma Territory for a spell. Colorado one summer." "That sounds lonely," Lillian said softly. "It can be," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "But it's simpler that way." The lights of Gonzales came into view, a welcome sight as full darkness descended. The small town was quieting for the night, though the saloon on Main Street still buzzed with activity, piano music and raucous laughter spilling into the street. "The hotel is just there." Lillian pointed to a two-story building with a painted sign. Caleb guided Penny to the front of the establishment and dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Lillian down. Their fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary before both pulled away. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Tucker," Lillian said formally. "I'm in your debt." Caleb shook his head. "No debt, Miss James. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Goodbye, then." As she turned to enter the hotel, Caleb found himself speaking again. "Miss James, if you're looking for work, Peterson's General Store was hanging a sign today. They need help with inventory and such." Lillian paused. "Thank you for telling me. I'll inquire tomorrow." Caleb nodded, watching as she disappeared into the hotel. Only then did he realize how hungry and tired he was. The day had taken an unexpected turn, and though he told himself it was just a chance encounter, the kind that happened often enough in his drifting life, something about Lillian James lingered in his thoughts as he led Penny toward the livery stable. The morning brought clear skies and the promise of heat as the sun climbed higher. Caleb had spent the night in a room above the livery, a cheap arrangement that suited his temporary needs. After a simple breakfast at the town's cafe, he made his way to the smithy where he'd arranged to help with some horseshoeing. He was halfway there when he spotted Lillian emerging from the hotel. She was wearing the same dress as yesterday, though she'd clearly attempted to clean and press it. Her hair was neatly arranged, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her circumstances. Caleb found himself changing direction, his feet carrying him toward her before his mind had fully decided to do so. "Morning, Miss James," he called out, tipping his hat. She turned, surprise registering on her face before she offered a polite smile. "Mr. Tucker, good morning. Headed to Peterson's?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "Yes, I thought it best to inquire early before someone else claims the position." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments, the town coming to life around them. Shopkeepers unlocked doors, women hung laundry in backyards, and children darted between buildings on their way to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. "I wanted to apologize again for yesterday," Lillian said suddenly. "You found me at a low moment. It wasn't my intention to burden a stranger with my troubles." "No apology needed," Caleb assured her. "We all have our moments." Lillian looked at him curiously. "And what about you, Mr. Tucker? What moments have shaped your wandering life?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Most people didn't ask, and he rarely volunteered information about himself. Yet something about her earnest interest made him want to answer. "Fought for the Confederacy," he said, the admission still uncomfortable even after 13 years. "Not because I believed in the cause, but because I was 18 and foolish, and that's what Texas boys did." He glanced at her to gauge her reaction, but her expression remained neutral. "Lost my pa in the war. Ma died 2 years after and the farm went to the bank. Didn't have much reason to stay after that." "I'm sorry about your parents," Lillian said softly. Caleb shrugged. "Long time ago now." They reached Peterson's General Store, a well-maintained building with a wide porch and large windows displaying everything from tools to fabric. The "Help Wanted" sign hung prominently on the door. "This is where I leave you," Caleb said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Good luck, Miss James," Lillian nodded. "Thank you for everything." As she turned to enter the store, Caleb surprised himself again. I'll be at the cafe for supper around 6 if you'd care to join me, to hear how your day went." Lillian looked back at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "I'd like that, Mr. Tucker." The workday passed in a blur of physical labor. Caleb helped the blacksmith with several horses, then spent the afternoon loading freight at the railroad depot. It was honest work that occupied his hands and body, if not entirely his mind. His thoughts kept drifting to Lillian, wondering if she'd secured the job, if she was settling in all right, if she would actually meet him for supper. By 5:45, Caleb had washed up as best he could, changed into his cleanest shirt, and was seated at a table in the cafe, feeling inexplicably nervous. The establishment was simple but respectable, serving hearty food to the working people of Gonzales. It wasn't fancy, but it was the best option for a proper meal with a lady. At precisely 6 o'clock, the door opened and Lillian entered. She had changed into a different dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and well mended. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she carried herself with more confidence than she had that morning. Caleb stood as she approached the table, conscious of the other patrons' curious glances. Newcomers were always a source of interest in small towns, and a pretty woman dining with a drifter even more so. "Miss James," he greeted her, pulling out a chair. "Mr. Tucker," she replied with a small smile, taking the offered seat. "Thank you for the invitation." Once they were settled and had placed their orders beef stew for both of them, the day's special, Caleb leaned forward slightly. "Well, how did it go at Peterson's?" Lillian's face brightened. "I start tomorrow. Mrs. Peterson was very kind." The position includes helping customers, keeping inventory, and assisting with the books. She smoothed her napkin in her lap. "The pay is modest, but it includes a small room above the store. I can move in tomorrow." "That's fine news," Caleb said, genuinely pleased for her. "Sounds like you're getting settled already." "It's a start," she agreed. "A far cry from what I hoped for when I returned, but—" She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "But I'm determined to make my own way here." Their meals arrived, steaming bowls of rich stew accompanied by thick slices of fresh bread. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both hungrier than they had realized. "What about you?" Lillian asked eventually. "Did you find work today?" Caleb nodded. "Helped at the smithy this morning, the depot this afternoon. Tomorrow I'm mucking stalls at the livery and helping build a shed behind the doctor's house." "You're quite versatile," Lillian observed. "Jack of all trades, master of none," Caleb replied with a self-deprecating smile. "But it keeps me fed and my horse cared for. And then on Monday you leave for Dodge City. That's the plan." The reminder of his impending departure created an unexpected heaviness in his chest. "Well then," Lillian said after a moment, "we should make the most of the time before you go. Perhaps you could show me around Gonzales. I left when I was still quite young and much has changed." Caleb looked at her in surprise. "You'd want my company." "You're the only person I know in town," she pointed out, then added more softly. "And I've found your company to be quite pleasant, Mr. Tucker." A warmth that had nothing to do with the stew spread through Caleb's chest. "Likewise, Miss James, and please call me Caleb. If we're to be friends for the next few days, there's no need for such formality." "Very well, Caleb," she said, his name sounding different better somehow in her gentle voice. "And you must call me Lillian." "Lillian," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. "I'd be honored to show you around town. Sunday would be best. It's my day off from work and the shops close early." "Sunday it is," she agreed. "I look forward to it." As they finished their meal, and Caleb insisted on paying, despite Lillian's protests, neither mentioned the fact that Sunday would be the day before his departure. The knowledge hovered between them, unacknowledged but ever present. The next few days established a pattern. Caleb worked various jobs around town during the day, while Lillian quickly proved herself invaluable at Peterson's general store. They would meet for supper at the cafe, exchanging stories of their day and gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Caleb learned that Lillian had been 19 when she left for Boston, and was now 23. She had hated the restrictive society of her uncle's home, where she was viewed as a poor relation and potential burden. She had a talent for numbers that Mr. Peterson appreciated, and a way with difficult customers that endeared her to Mrs. Peterson. She loved to raid, preferred sunrise to sunset, and could not abide licorice candy. Lillian discovered that Caleb was 32, could play the harmonica but rarely did any more, had once broken his arm falling from a horse when he was 12, and had a sweet tooth that contradicted his otherwise rugged demeanor. He sent part of his earnings to a widow in Austin, whose husband had served with him during the war, and he had never stayed in one place longer than 3 months since leaving home. By Saturday evening, their supper had extended to include a walk through town afterward, their conversation flowing easily as they strolled in the cooling evening air. They were no longer strangers, yet the boundaries of friendship remained carefully observed between them. "Do you ever get tired of moving around?" Lillian asked as they walked past the church, its white steeple silhouetted against the darkening sky. Caleb considered her question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Winter nights can be long when you're alone on the trail. And there are moments when I see families together, building something permanent." He shrugged. "But then I remember that permanence brings its own troubles. Roots can be cut, homes lost. I learned that lesson early. So you choose to have nothing for fear of losing everything." Lillian challenged gently. Caleb gave her a sidelong glance. "When you put it that way, it sounds foolish." "Not foolish," she said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Just cautious, perhaps overly so." They had reached the hotel where they always parted ways, Caleb to his room above the livery and Lillian to her new quarters above the general store. "Tomorrow at 10, Caleb confirmed. "I'll meet you here." "I'll be waiting," Lillian promised. They stood facing each other in the soft glow of the hotel's exterior lamp, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Caleb was acutely aware of how beautiful she looked in the gentle light, how close she stood, how easy it would be to reach for her hand or brush a stray curl from her cheek. Instead, he took a step back and tipped his hat. "Good night, Lillian." "Good night, Caleb." Was there a hint of disappointment in her voice, or was he imagining it as he walked away? Caleb silently berated himself. 5 days. He'd known her for 5 days, and in 3 more he'd be gone. Whatever this feeling was that stirred in his chest when she smiled or laughed or looked at him with those thoughtful eyes, it couldn't be allowed to grow. For both their sakes, Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect day for their planned outing. Caleb arrived at the general store precisely at 10, having taken extra care with his appearance. He'd even splurged on a haircut the previous day, though he told himself it was simply because it had grown too long. Lillian emerged from the store in a dress he hadn't seen before, a pretty green calico that complemented her eyes and honey brown hair. She wore a simple straw bonnet tied with a ribbon that matched her dress, and carried a small reticule. "You look lovely," Caleb said before he could stop himself. A blush colored Lillian's cheeks. "Thank you. Mrs. Peterson insisted I take this dress, said it was left by a customer who never returned for it, and it fits me well enough." "It does," Caleb agreed, offering his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Lillian placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, and they set off. The day was a revelation for them both. Caleb showed Lillian how Gonzalez had changed and grown in the years she'd been away. They visited the town square, where he recounted what he knew of the famous come and take it cannon incident that had helped spark the Texas Revolution over 40 years earlier. They walked along the Guadalupe River, admiring its peaceful flow. Caleb pointed out the new buildings and businesses that had sprung up in recent years, and Lillian shared memories of places from her childhood. They stopped for a picnic lunch that Mrs. Peterson had packed for them, finding a shady spot beneath a large oak tree just outside of town. As they ate cold chicken and biscuits, their conversation turned to dreams and aspirations, things neither had spoken of to anyone in a long time. "If you could do anything, be anything," Lillian asked, "what would you choose?" Caleb leaned back against the tree trunk. "Honestly, I'd have a horse ranch. Nothing too grand, just enough land to raise and train good stock, maybe a few cattle, a place where a man could build something worthwhile." "Where would this ranch be?" "Somewhere like this," he said, gesturing to the rolling landscape around them. "Good water, decent grazing, not too far from civilization but far enough to have some peace." Lillian nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I can picture you there." "What about you?" he asked. "What dream brought you back to Gonzales?" Her smile faded slightly. "It wasn't so much a dream as a memory. I remembered being happy here, having a place that was ours, after living in my uncle's home where I was always reminded that I didn't quite belong." She sighed. "I suppose I came back looking for that feeling of belonging again. And have you found it?" Lillian considered this. "Not yet, but I think I might in time." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Two people searching for something elusive, something they both understood but couldn't quite name. The moment stretched, taut with possibility, until Lillian looked away. "We should continue our tour," she said softly. "There's still much to see." As the afternoon progressed, they found themselves wandering farther from town, following a winding dirt road that led past scattered homesteads and farms. Caleb realized they were nearing the abandoned James property and was about to suggest turning back when Lillian spoke. "It's not far now, is it?" she asked, looking ahead. "My family's home." "About half a mile," Caleb confirmed. "We don't have to go there if you'd rather not." Lillian squared her shoulders. "No, I want to. I left in such a state last time. I'd like to see it again properly." They walked in silence until the dilapidated structure came into view. In the bright Sunday afternoon light, it looked even more forlorn than it had when Caleb first found Lillian there. As they approached, Lillian's steps slowed. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I was so overcome with grief when I came here the other day. But now I can see it clearly for what it is, just a house. The home I remembered died with my parents." Caleb nodded in understanding. "Sometimes places hold memories more than anything else." "Yes," Lillian agreed, stopping at the edge of what had once been a garden. "But memories can be carried with us. They don't have to be tied to a specific place." She turned to Caleb, her expression resolute. "I don't think I need to go inside again. I've made my peace with it." Relief washed over him. He hadn't been sure how she would react to returning, and was glad to see her facing her past with such strength. "Ready to head back to town, then?" "In a moment," Lillian said. She walked to a small cluster of wildflowers growing near the broken fence and picked a few. With deliberate steps, she approached the side of the house where two simple wooden crosses stood, her parents' graves. Caleb stayed back, giving her privacy as she placed the flowers between the markers and knelt briefly, her lips moving in what he assumed was a prayer. When she rose and returned to his side, her eyes were dry but full of emotion. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For being here. For understanding. For finding me that day when I needed someone most." Caleb swallowed hard, touched by her words. "I'm glad it was me," he said softly. The walk back to town was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning its descent as they reached the outskirts of Gonzales, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Beautiful," Lillian murmured, pausing to admire the sunset. "Yes," Caleb agreed, though he was looking at her profile gilded by the golden light, not the sky. She turned and caught him watching her. Their eyes held, and this time neither looked away. Caleb felt a pull toward her that was almost physical, a longing to close the distance between them that had nothing to do with the few feet of Texas dirt that separated them. The dinner bell from the cafe broke the spell, reminding them that the day was ending. "We should get supper," Caleb suggested, his voice rougher than he intended. "Yes," Lillian agreed, though she made no move to continue walking. "Lillian," Caleb began, then stopped, unsure what he wanted to say. How could he express the confusion of feelings that had grown in him over the past week? How could he tell her that the thought of leaving tomorrow filled him with a dread he'd never experienced before? That for the first time in 13 years, he was questioning his solitary existence. "I know," she said softly, understanding in her eyes. "I feel it too, but you're leaving tomorrow and I've only just begun to build a life here." The practical truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He nodded, acknowledging the impossibility of what remained unspoken between them. They walked the rest of the way to the cafe in silence, each wrestling with emotions too new and too powerful to be easily contained. Dinner was a subdued affair, their usual easy conversation replaced by polite small talk and long pauses. As they prepared to part outside the general store, Lillian finally spoke the words that had been hovering between them all evening. "What time do you leave tomorrow?" "First light," Caleb answered. "Need to meet the cattle drive north of San Antonio by nightfall." Lillian nodded, her eyes downcast. "Then I suppose this is goodbye." "I suppose it is." The words felt hollow, inadequate. "Will you write?" she asked suddenly, looking up at him. "Just to let me know you arrived safely in Dodge City." Caleb hesitated. In his experience, prolonging connections only made the inevitable separation more painful. Clean breaks were easier, and yet— "I will," he promised. "Where should I send it?" "Care of Peterson's General Store, Gonzales, Texas," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "I don't plan on going anywhere." "Lillian," Caleb said, taking a step closer. "I want you to know that these past days have been—" She placed a finger gently against his lips, stopping his words. "Don't say it, please. It will only make tomorrow harder." Caleb captured her hand in his, holding it against his chest for a moment before reluctantly releasing it. "You're right, as always." "Goodbye, Caleb Tucker," Lillian said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Travel safely." "Goodbye, Lillian James," he replied. "Take care of yourself." She turned and entered the store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, incongruous with the heaviness in Caleb's heart. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door before finally turning and walking away. The night was long and sleepless. Caleb packed his few belongings mechanically, his mind replaying every moment with Lillian, every smile, every word. By the time false dawn lightened the eastern sky, he had made a decision. He saddled Penny and led her quietly through the sleeping town, stopping in front of Peterson's General Store. Tethering the mare to the hitching post, he climbed the stairs at the side of the building that led to the upstairs rooms. Outside what he assumed was Lillian's door, he hesitated, then knocked softly. After a moment, the door opened a crack and Lillian peered out, wrapped in a shawl over her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. Surprise registered on her face when she saw him. "Caleb." "What? I couldn't leave without saying this," he interrupted, the words tumbling out before courage failed him. I've spent 13 years running from putting down roots, from caring too much about any place or person. But this past week with you has shown me what I've been missing." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to wait for me. I have to fulfill this contract. It's 3 months' work on the drive, and I've given my word. But when it's done, I'll come back, if you'll have me." Lillian stared at him, speechless for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Do you mean it?" "With all my heart," Caleb affirmed. "I know it's sudden and maybe foolish, but I've never been more certain of anything." A slow smile spread across Lillian's face, transforming it with joy. "Then yes, Caleb Tucker, I will wait for you." Relief and happiness surged through him. "I'll write every chance I get, and I'll be back before the first frost." "I'll be here," she promised. Then, with a boldness that surprised them both, she stepped forward and kissed him quickly on the cheek. "Now go, before you're late." Caleb caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. 3 months, he said, the words a promise. 3 months, she echoed, with one last look at her, memorizing the sight of her standing in the doorway. Hair aglow in the early morning light, Caleb descended the stairs. He mounted Penny and tipped his hat to Lillian, who watched from above, then turned the mare toward the road leading north out of town. For the first time in years, he was not just leaving a place behind, he was also heading toward a future. A future with Lillian James in it. The cattle drive to Dodge City was the hardest work Caleb had ever undertaken, not because of the physical demands, though those were substantial, but because of the constant pull he felt toward Gonzales. Each mile northward seemed to stretch the invisible thread connecting him to Lillian, testing its strength but never breaking it. He wrote whenever possible, sending letters with travelers heading south or at post offices in the small towns they passed. His messages were sometimes short, dictated by time constraints and his limited skill with words, but always heartfelt. He told her about the trail, the cattle, the men he worked with. He described the changing landscape as they crossed from Texas into Indian Territory and finally into Kansas. And in each letter, he counted down the days until his return. Lillian's replies, forwarded to him at predetermined stops along the trail, became his most treasured possessions. She wrote of her growing responsibilities at Peterson's, of the friends she was making in town, of the small garden she'd started behind the store. She never explicitly mentioned missing him, but he could read it between the lines, just as he hoped she could sense his longing in his own letters. The drive reached Dodge City in early August, ahead of schedule despite losing some cattle to a river crossing gone wrong. After the herd was delivered and payment received, Caleb faced a choice. The trail boss had offered him a position on the return journey, which would mean more money but also a further delay in getting back to Gonzales. The decision was easy. "Sorry, boss," he said, pocketing his wages. "I've got someone waiting for me back in Texas." The return journey was faster without a herd to drive, but still took weeks. Caleb pushed himself and Penny hard, stopping only when necessary, his anticipation growing with each passing day. He wondered if Lillian would have changed, if her feelings might have cooled in his absence. His own had only strengthened, crystallizing into a certainty he'd never experienced before. It was mid-September when he crested the final hill overlooking Gonzales. The town lay spread before him, looking much as it had when he left, though the fields surrounding it had changed with the season. Caleb patted Penny's neck. "Almost there, girl. Just a little farther." As he rode down the main street, he noted a few curious glances from townspeople who remembered him from before. He nodded politely but didn't stop to chat. There was only one person he wanted to see. Peterson's general store looked busy when he arrived, customers coming and going through the front door. Caleb dismounted and tethered Penny, suddenly nervous. What if Lillian wasn't there? What if she'd changed her mind? Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door, the familiar bell announcing his arrival. The store was indeed full of shoppers, with Mr. Peterson himself behind the counter. Caleb scanned the space anxiously, his heart sinking when he didn't immediately see Lillian. Then he heard her voice from the back room, calling out to Mr. Peterson about an inventory matter. A moment later, she emerged, carrying a stack of fabric bolts. She saw him immediately, freezing in place, her eyes widening. The fabric slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud. "Caleb," she whispered, as if not quite believing her eyes. "I'm back," he said simply, removing his hat. "As promised." For a heartbeat, they stood staring at each other across the crowded store, oblivious to the curious looks from customers. Then Lillian was moving, stepping carefully around the fallen fabric, making her way to him with measured steps that soon quickened into a near run. She stopped just short of throwing herself into his arms, remembering their audience, but her eyes said everything her propriety wouldn't allow her lips to speak. "You're early," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Your last letter said October." "The drive went faster than expected," Caleb explained, "and I couldn't wait any longer." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat loudly from behind the counter. "Miss James, why don't you take your lunch break now? It seems you have some catching up to do." Lillian's cheeks flushed. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I won't be long." "Take all the time you need," the older man said, a knowing smile touching his lips. "We can manage." Without another word, Lillian collected her shawl from a hook by the door and led Caleb outside. They walked in silence until they reached a small garden behind the store, private enough for conversation but still within the bounds of propriety. The moment they were alone, Caleb couldn't contain himself any longer. He gathered Lillian into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, reassuring himself that she was real and not just the dream that had sustained him for 3 months. "I missed you," he murmured against her temple. "More than I can say." Lillian's arms tightened around his waist. "I missed you too, so much." She pulled back slightly to look up at his face. "Every day felt longer than the last, for me as well." Caleb reached up to touch her cheek gently. "But I'm here now and I don't plan on leaving again." "Not without you, at least." Lillian's eyes searched his. "What are you saying, Caleb?" "I'm saying that these past months have only confirmed what I already knew when I left, that I love you, Lillian James, that I want to build a life with you." He took a deep breath. "I've saved every penny I earned on the drive. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to make a start. There's a small property for sale about 3 miles east of town. 10 acres with a decent house that needs some work. It could be ours if you want it." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "You've thought this all through, haven't you? Had plenty of time to think on the trail," Caleb said with a small smile. "But it all depends on one thing." He took her hands in his. "Do you feel the same way? Could you see yourself building a life with me?" "Oh, Caleb," Lillian breathed. "I've been imagining that very future since the day you left. Yes, I love you. Yes to everything." Relief and joy flooded through him. Caleb drew her close again, and this time when their eyes met, he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Lillian rose on her tiptoes, meeting him halfway as their lips touched in a first kiss that was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally parted, both were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "I should get back to work," Lillian said reluctantly. "Where will you stay?" "I'll find a room at the hotel for now," Caleb replied. "And tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to show you the property." "I can't wait," Lillian said, squeezing his hands before reluctantly releasing them. "Supper at the cafe tonight, 6 o'clock." "I'll be there," Caleb promised, settling his hat back on his head. "And Lillian, this is just the beginning. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Caleb purchased the small property he'd mentioned, and every free moment was spent making repairs to the house and clearing the land. Lillian continued working at Peterson's, though she gave notice that she would be leaving at the end of October. The Petersons, who had become like family to her, were thrilled about her engagement and insisted on hosting the wedding at their home. The ceremony took place on a crisp November afternoon, with half the town in attendance. Lillian wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Caleb, clean-shaven and nervous, waited for her at the front of the Petersons' parlor, hardly believing his good fortune. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, Caleb reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led him to that abandoned homestead months ago. One moment of compassion, one decision to stop rather than ride on, had changed the course of his life forever. That evening, as he carried his bride over the threshold of their newly renovated home, Caleb felt a sense of peace and belonging he hadn't experienced since childhood. This was what he had been searching for during all those years of wandering not a place, but a person. His person. His Lillian. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tucker," he said, setting her gently on her feet in their small but cozy front room. Lillian's eyes shone with happiness as she looked around at the simple furnishings they had collected: a table and chairs, a small sofa, a rocking chair by the fireplace. "It's perfect," she declared. "Everything I've ever wanted." "There's still much to do," Caleb cautioned. "The barn needs finishing before I can bring in livestock, and the fields need clearing for planting come spring." "And we'll do it together," Lillian said confidently, wrapping her arms around his waist. "One day at a time." As winter settled over Gonzales, the Tucker homestead became a haven of warmth and happiness. Caleb worked tirelessly to establish their small ranch. Starting with a few horses he planned to breed and train. Lillian turned the house into a home, planting an indoor herb garden that thrived on the kitchen windowsill, and making curtains for the windows from fabric Mr. Peterson had given them as a wedding gift. They celebrated their first Christmas together with simple gifts and a special dinner. Lillian had saved to buy Caleb a new saddle, while he surprised her with a piano he'd purchased secondhand and secretly transported from San Antonio. Though neither was an accomplished musician, the instrument filled their evenings with music and laughter as they took turns attempting to play. Spring brought new beginnings. The fields Caleb had cleared yielded their first crops, and 2 of the mares they'd purchased were in foal. Lillian's garden flourished under her careful tending, providing vegetables for their table and flowers to brighten the house. But the most significant new beginning came in April, when Lillian shared the news that they would be welcoming a child by the end of the year. Caleb's joy knew no bounds as he lifted his wife in a gentle embrace, already imagining their family growing within the home they had built together. "Are you happy, truly happy?" Lillian asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant hues. Her hand rested on her growing belly, where their child stirred. Caleb covered her hand with his own, feeling the movement beneath. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "You've given me everything I never knew I needed, Lillian. A home, a purpose, a family. And to think it all began with tears," she mused. "If I hadn't gone back to that abandoned homestead, if you hadn't heard me crying." "I believe we would have found each other somehow," Caleb said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "Some things are just meant to be." Their son, Samuel James Tucker, was born on a cold December night with the assistance of the town doctor and Mrs. Peterson. Caleb paced anxiously outside the bedroom during the long labor, praying as he had never prayed before. When at last He was allowed in to see his wife and child. The sight of them together, Lillian tired but radiant. The tiny bundle in her arms humbled him beyond words. "Come meet your son," Lillian said softly, her smile luminous despite her exhaustion. Caleb approached the bed cautiously and sat beside his wife, peering down at the small red face partially hidden by a blanket. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the infant's cheek with one finger. "Just like his mother." Life settled into a new rhythm with Samuel's arrival. The days were fuller, the nights sometimes longer, but every moment was infused with a joy that neither Caleb nor Lillian had dared to imagine when they first met. Their small ranch prospered, gaining a reputation for quality horses that commanded good prices. They added a few cattle, then a few more, gradually building the operation Caleb had once only dreamed of. 2 years after Samuel's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Emily Rose. The family was complete, their home filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the everyday noise of a busy, loving household. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Caleb surprised Lillian with a special outing. They left the children with the Petersons for the afternoon and rode out together, Lillian curious about their destination until she recognized the road they were taking. "The old homestead," she asked, puzzled. "Why are we going there?" "You'll see," Caleb replied mysteriously. When they arrived, Lillian gasped in surprise. The abandoned house was gone, replaced by a small memorial garden. A stone marker stood in the center, engraved with the names of her parents and the dates of their lives. "Caleb," she breathed, dismounting and walking toward the garden. "When did you do this?" "I've been working on it for a few months," he admitted, joining her. "I wanted to create a place where you could come to remember them and where we could bring Samuel and Emily as they grow older to learn about their grandparents." Tears filled Lillian's eyes as she turned to her husband. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "This place brought us together," Caleb said, taking her hands in his. "Your grief led you here, and my concern led me to you. It seemed fitting to transform it into something meaningful." Lillian looked around at the flowering plants and the neatly maintained space. "From sorrow to joy," she murmured. "That's the story of this place. Of us." As they stood together in the peaceful garden, Caleb reflected on the journey that had led them there. From a drifter with no home to a man with roots so deep and strong they could weather any storm. From a grieving young woman to a confident wife and mother who had found her place in the world. "I love you, Lillian Tucker," he said, drawing her into his arms. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you, Caleb Tucker," she replied, her eyes shining with the same devotion that had sustained them through the years, always and forever. As they rode home together, back to their children and the life they had built, both knew that what they had found was rare and precious, a love that had transformed not just an abandoned homestead, but their very souls. A love that had turned tears of sorrow into tears of joy and strangers into family. A love that would endure, like the Texas land itself, through all the seasons of their lives together.